Sri Lanka, apparently, like there were some intelligence warnings, but they were ignored. Before we move on, however, a major counter-argument to all of this would be that, well, Michele, this, what are you talking about? This is how organizations in general work. We all have these problems in the economic world, in the political world. People don't like each other. People compete. People do not cooperate. And guess what? Terrorists do exactly the same thing, meaning they don't share as much intelligence. They fight with each other. They don't like each other. To such regard, I suggest you read or you take a look at Asaf Moghadam's book on how terrorists cooperate, which is actually very interesting, right? Because they do cooperate, but there are some underlying tensions. It's not that they're not that much better than us. Then, now it's time to talk about the law and counterterrorism. Again, let me make a short premise. This topic particularly, and I know that a few of you are expert in international law, this is arguably the most difficult one because you know, the law is incredibly intricate. There are so many things, the aspect that you have to know, right? Something before you embark on this type of discourse. Therefore, team, forgive me, especially those of you who are experts, if I am being overly simplistic or if I am being not like as precise as you would be. But just for the sake of it, you know, I'm gonna explain a few legal principles that can at least make some sense of what we're trying to do. But obviously, at the end of it, feel free to chip in if you happen to, to want to share something more. That said, international customary law hinders the use of force. I mean that we cannot go around and bomb and kill everyone if we want to like that, right? Except in a few specific instances, even against non-state actors. So even if we get attacked and the attack is considered an armed attack, we can do something about that. And particularly, we can evoke Article 51 of the UN Charter, which is pretty much self-defense, right? And we can take action against non-state actors, even provided that a number of principles are met. And here they are: necessity, proportionality, imminence, and obviously respect for international humanitarian law, which is based on the Geneva Convention, the following protocols, because obviously after World War II and all the things, the bad things that happened, we had to make sure that even during combat situations like, or during conflict, a number of rules were respected to protect civilians and all that. Within this, however, it is very important for us, given that we fight against non-state actors, that we make a distinction between civilian and combatant. I don't have time to delve into what combatant is and all that, but just for the sake of it, terrorists do not really fit with either. A terrorist is not really a civilian, but is not really a combatant, right? And so we have been using terms such as unlawful combatants or unlawful belligerent, but they do not have any legal meaning. And therefore, again, there's some type of confusion, there's some type of uncertainty as to what a terrorist in legal terms actually is. Countries, however, especially Israel, the US, have pretty much, and I underline that with a grain of salt, right, because it's debated, but they have pretty much adopted war model and war laws, and therefore they consider terrorists to be a little bit more of combatants than others, provided that that they carry weapons openly. I know it's much more complicated than that, but just to give us the framework. And that said, you know, we can make the argument, or I mean, people have made the argument, such as Greenwood writing in International Affairs in 2002, that at least at the very beginning, for instance, the war on terror was legal, or at least like had some legal justification, because 9/11 was considered an armed attack, and therefore we were able to evoke self-defense. It was necessary, right, because Bin Laden was not going to turn himself in. It was fairly proportionate, meaning that we went to Afghanistan and we started fighting. Obviously, the Taliban do not and did not have the same military equipment that we did, but you know, the engagement was fairly proportionate in very brutal, and once again, forgive me for saying this, but we didn't nuke them, right? So in that case, we can kind of say that it was proportionate. It was imminent because 9/11 was big. We were afraid that they were going to attack again, and Al Qaeda was very real, right? And at least Greenwood says that at the very beginning, even if there were some major shortcomings, we were kind of respectful of international humanitarian law because a minimum standard was granted. And therefore, as the war progressed, people like Thames and Daphne, or experts such as my professor, Daniel Reisner, one of the IDF's major legal experts, right? And William Banks from Syracuse University then stretched or justified self-defense even in preventive terms, meaning targeted killings. I can kill you legally if you represent a threat to national security, starting what will later become as the drone campaign, by George W. Bush, and then Obama, and then Trump, and then in the Israeli territories. So the point being, there are, even if they are contested, and we're going to see that, but there are some legal justifications. However, exactly based on this principle, well, let's actually try to debate with a few cases. I'm pretty sure that a number of you do recognize this man. His name was Anwar al-Awlaki. He was dubbed the Bin Laden of the internet. He was the editor of Inspire, Al-Qaeda's magazine. So he was obviously considered a major threat to American and in general, like international security. And so in 2011, President Obama ordered his killing, and so a drone by the CIA killed him in Yemen. However, this is very important, and keep this in mind. Al-Awlaki was a Yemeni, yes, but was also an American citizen. And this case is particularly relevant because it was the first time that an American citizen got killed outside the United States without a trial, without pretty much a warning. Yes, of course, he was on the targeted or the targeted list, but this is big, right? Or this was big. And so we can actually ask the question, whoa, wait a second. Was it really necessary? Weren't there, given that he was a US citizen, yes, of course, he was inciting hatred. Yes, of course, he was a dangerous subject. Of course, the Obama administration argued that he was planning attacks on US civilians. Absolutely, no doubt about it. But did we have to kill him in Yemen? So it's disputed, right? Both in America and elsewhere. Was it really necessary? I don't know. And now a topic which is actually very dear, right, to many of us here. Let's not forget that obviously we're talking about people, we're talking about lives, and counterterrorism by definition can be violent, right? They attack us, we have to strike back, right? However, we have to be proportionate. But what does proportionality mean in actual terms? Where do collateral damage and all the associated destruction, which by the way could also be seen as collective punishment, where do these fit in the proportionality paradigm? This is very contested, right? Different countries have different opinions, but at the end of the day, we still kill in the pursuit of security. Maybe in the legal pursuit of security, we still kill other people, and therefore, is this proportionate? Is this fair? Is this a war crime? I don't know. But and the other piece of consideration that I wanted to share with you is that unfortunately this is nothing new. The British, when they were fighting IRA, Northern Ireland, PYRA, or even the IDF during the first and the second Intifada, this was a very important question. Not just in terms of legality, but also in terms of effectiveness. Can we have a boomerang effect? Yes, we're killing 1, 2, 10 terrorists, but how many are you creating, right? Afterwards. But anyway, the point being, this remains a fairly contested principle. Obviously, I'm pretty sure that we all remember what happened a few months ago with the killing of Iranian General Qasem Soleimani. Yeah, look, obviously the Trump administration fairly said, right? So I mean, or at least like to at least to some point, well, he was a threat to national security because he was orchestrating a wide range of terrorist activities throughout the region to destabilize the region or like the very region and wage some type of war. So attack US allies and troops and personnel in the Middle East. Therefore, if we stretch or if we apply the principle of self-defense in preventive terms, we can actually or we can actually kill him. However, was that threat imminent from a high-rank official from Iran in Iraq, given the fact that we are not at war with Iran, or at least we're not at war with Iran yet, and then it took place in Iraq. So in a third country, potentially even breaking sovereignty and the rights of the host state. The US said that they actually got in touch, right? But this is also contested because a few Iraqi generals said, well, we didn't know, right? So, but the point being, was that imminent? You know, like was this person like really about to seriously harm the US in the region? Once more, apologies for repeating myself, but this is very contested. And last but not least, are we actually respecting the international humanitarian laws? You know, think about torture, think about detention, think about what we call enhanced interrogation techniques. I want to share this with you. Former NCIS, Naval Criminal Investigation Services, that's what it stands for. But anyway, like Special Agent Mark Follen wrote a book entitled Unjustifiable Means, stating, and while commenting on his piece, he actually declared that torture is illegal and immoral because it produces tainted evidence and corrupted intelligence, and we should never go down that road again. So there was an admission, yes, we actually did torture people, yes, we actually did something which was very bad. I really encourage you to look through his works. I watched an interview in which he actually said, you know, it didn't used to be that way. We started off well, then we kind of lost it, right? So there was also this admission in which we didn't do well, right? So in that respect. I know that it was a lot, but let's try to recap. Legally speaking, we can say that, or we can say experts have argued that at the very beginning, especially at the very beginning, the war on terrorism had some legal justification. And in general, you know, even if you look at the works by Paccione, which is going to be published very, very soon, there are a number of counterterrorism measures that can still have some legal ground, right? However, you know, yes, but it's not so black and white, because the point is that there is such an ongoing, continuous debate on the legality of major counterterrorism concepts and methods. Look at Stereo, Sanders, Hajar, right? So they all debate. I have pretty much summarized what they're saying in terms of necessity, proportionality, imminence, right? But unfortunately, we don't stop there, because if the law can be interpreted, if countries such as America, or even a reality in which I'm very familiar with and I really like, which is Israel, can kind of tweak the law or do in certain situations what they believe to be the right thing, well, you know, this creates a lot of confusion, and obviously people are going to accuse them of being, you know, unfair, double standards, manipulation. And in general, actually, we're going back to global governance, right? Where is the UN Security Council in all of this, right? So why aren't they taking any action? So this is another huge point. especially because, once again, there are so many gray zones. I've mentioned that before, but we didn't really expand upon the rights of host state and sovereignty, communication, and all that. That is very important. If we are to kill people, even our own citizens in Pakistan, in Yemen, in Iraq, or you know, the host country, the intelligence community, the police, the army, everybody has to know. But the problem is that between you and I, we don't trust them sometimes, and so we don't tell them, or we kind of tell them, but whatever we want. So that is an issue. Another thing that we didn't really talk about, but is also very interesting: what happens when we have state-sponsored terrorism? So just for the sake of it, let's just assume, let's not debate it, but let's just assume for the sake of it that Iran, Hamas, and Hezbollah, even if, so obviously Iran is a state, but let's just, for the sake of it, let's just assume that Hamas and Hezbollah function at least as state. What do we do with them, right? So like, can we bomb them? Yes, of course we can sanction them, but what happens legally, right? So this is another thing that is fairly contested. And then one last thing, as for law and terrorism, let's keep this in mind. Law can be at times fairly, schematic, rigid, right? Or it needs scrutiny. It needs people who study them. It needs a lot of published articles and right? Terrorism sometimes is fast, generally speaking, right? Right? And there are certain scenarios in which I'm not really sure if the law can actually keep up or can explain, right? Because we need to, we need to think. For instance, so let's say that we expel in my country, and I will be touching upon that later on. We deport people, right? So if they're not Italian citizens and we deem them as threats to national security, we can expel the people. However, what do you do if you have an asylum-seeking person? You think that person might be a threat to national security, and you have to expel that person. But what happens if you know that if you expel that person back, they're going to torture him or her, or they're going to send that person to prison, and they're going to mistreat them. So that is hard, right? What about stripping of citizenship? In Britain, especially, I suggest that you look at Kodari's work on this. They have been debating this. So should we actually strip people who go to the Middle East and fight for ISIS, for instance, like of their citizenship? But then again, what does it mean to be legally British and whatnot? So it's I don't know. It's complicated. Last but not least, what about returnees? What are they, legally speaking? So when they come back, are they terrorists? Are they fighters? Are they combatants? Are they criminals? Are they poor people? Should we reintegrate them? What about newborns, children who were born in the Islamic State? Where are they? Right? So I don't know, but anyway, the point being, so the main takeaway from all of this is that yes, there are some legal or there could be some legal certainties, but in reality there are a lot of legal uncertainties and dilemmas, right? However, once again, a huge counter-argument of everything that is said here would be like, okay, fine, Michele, the law is not very clear sometimes. Yes, there are some double standards. Yes, sometimes we do not follow the law literally by the book. However, keep in mind that terrorists do not follow the law. And if we get caught up and stay here trying to follow every single word that the law says, they're going to attack us. We don't have time. Law revision and all that takes time. We need to take action because, unfortunately, security sometimes, I'm not championing that, but I'm just reporting what I've heard in my experience. Sometimes security has to come first, right? I know that this is a very dangerous thing to say, but imagine maybe you've been hunting down terrorists for months, years, and then maybe for some legal things, you're not able maybe to pursue them, and you compromise a whole operation, and so, right? So obviously, so I mean, I would be very interesting to hear what you think when this is over, right? So, but the point being, once again, it is complicated. Then the third major areas is obviously deals with what we call the democratic and obviously ethical dilemmas. Tim, why is this important for us? We're not saying, and I underline that we are better than systems that are not democratic, monarchies or military establishments and all that. No, 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 no. But from a quote Western, and I don't really know what Western means, but just allow me the term, from a Western perspective, to us, this is very important because we died for this. We fought for this back in the days, back in the ages. And therefore, you know, the way that we do things have to comply with the law. I mean, for us, because if not, that's, I mean, at least in principle for us, there's a big contradiction. So, as you can see in the picture, especially in the United States, but even here in Europe, there's been a lot of controversy surrounding the patriarchal number of measures that are not only are legally unstable. For instance, I did not really touch upon indefinite detention, for instance, right? Or data collection and all that. But let's just assume for 1 second that everything is legal, right? You know, is this the democracy that we really want? A lot of people have been asking this question, right? In which the government, in the name of security, can actually control what you do, can actually monitor your activities, can actually gather as much information virtually, as much information as possible. And in some cases, obviously, they can arrest you without any warrant, so no habeas corpus. They can detain you indefinitely, and we don't know what's happening to you. Is this like, probably this is not even legal, but you know, let's say it is. Is this democratic? Is this what we want, right? And in addition to this, obviously, it is also very important to talk about the major implication that the war on terrorism or counterterrorism has actually produced, again, in terms of society, like in terms of societal implications. We have been seeing a sharp rise in Islamophobic attitudes, for instance. So we have seen the Trump administration banning several Muslim countries from the US and all that. The point being, once again, is this really democratic? Is this really what we want? To create a culture of suspicion, a culture of us versus them, a culture of not unity, but rather, as I was saying, difference, fear, and all that. If you're interested in the topic, either in this one and this one, I urge you to read Tahir Abbas, Catherine Brown, Stuart Croft, even Risa Brooks, actually, but I mean, the first three on the secularization and criminalization of certain groups and communities, namely Muslim and immigrants in the West. Ooh, then there's another huge one, and this one is media. Because as Brian Jenkins, one of the major experts in terrorism, once famously stated, terrorism is a stage. Terrorists follow a script and they want attention. I'm just quoting him like directly. What does it mean? That obviously terrorism is so intertwined, is so linked with publicity, media. If somebody attacks and nobody cares, you're not that effective as a terrorist, right? And therefore, this actually brings to another dilemma: how we cover, how we show terrorism on TV, in the news, in newspapers, and all that. So on one side, we have, maybe something like this, right? So very cynic, graphic imagery, which arguably scare us, right? Or arguably create a lot of, strong feelings and sensations, right? Or in other cases, here we might even have round the clock and even live coverage of terrorist attacks, instilling terror probably in people. Like I don't know if you do the same thing, but given that I have nothing better to do and probably I'm mentally disturbed, when terrorist incidents happen, I always follow Twitter and all that in a very bad thing. Once my wife in the middle of the night kind of yelled at me because it was 3 a.m. and it was like when I think it was, when the London Bridge attack happened, I was there frantically, looking for news, right? But once again, this is the media dilemma. On one side, if we decide to show all of this, we actually might scare people, and we do what the terrorists want. We grant them publicity, and we blow the threat out of proportion. Now, let me make one thing clear. I do not want to be disrespectful to these people here laying on the ground who lost their lives or maybe who got injured, because I do think that terrorism is a serious threat, right? And all my sympathies goes to them. But the point being, if they attack us and we show all of this, it's like they attack us 100 times. And so, and that's very, 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 very bad. However, if we go to the other side of the spectrum, and if we do not show what happened, if we censored terrorism, this is as bad as before, right? It's equally bad. Why? Because then the terrorists win again, because they forced us to go against undemocratic principles of freedom of press and freedom of expression. And once again, instilling fear in people. Something happened, and you, government, are not telling us, you're hiding the truth. So we're going to create more paranoia. This is the legal apologies. This is the media dilemma. If you're interested, I advise or I suggest you read Ben O'Loughlin and Mortensen. They have been writing, and obviously back in the days, Ganor, they have been writing and they have been strategizing about new ways to actually cover terrorism without doing something like this. Without fear, without or without promoting anger, right, and fear, and all of that. Then here we have the ethical dilemmas, because listen, let's assume that everything is legal. However, look, how do we fight terrorism at some point? In my country, and I'm pretty sure that all the Italians in the audience know this, back in the days, we kind of, or at least allegedly, but between us, we know we did, right? So we actually came to terms. We negotiated. We did, or we carried out under the desk deals with members of probably left and right-wing terrorism, or even the mafia, right? Why? Well, because we kind of wanted to be very pragmatic about it. So in this situation, a lot of people have been asking, well, okay, so can we actually negotiate with terrorists? And if so, can we cut deals for them? Can we actually say, okay, if you give me this, I can give you that? We did that in Italy. We created a system called pentiti, right? Meaning that if you repent and if you help us, we're going to make you a deal. We're going to cut you a deal. Are you actually repented? No, we don't care. But as long as it looks good, right? And also we created disassozionismo, meaning you could disassociate with the armed struggle, not renounce, not reject it, but just disassociate yourself from that, right? Is that ethical? I don't know, right? Because we didn't do that out in the blue, right? It was all top secret, but once again, I don't know. And another thing, ethically speaking, when we fight terrorism, even by kinetic means or non-kinetic means, can we intimidate? Right? So I mean, like this. For instance, was a cartoon that was available in Iraq before al-Zarqawi's death. Al-Zarqawi was the Al-Qaeda's like, I'm going to say leader, but anyway, but main figure in Iraq. And if I recall correctly, this says this is how you're going to end. That is like a rat. So we are intimidating. Is that good? Is that something that we should do, right, or not? And also, we have a lot of counter narrative efforts. Probably even in the audience, some of you are doing counter narratives, counter extremism, prevention of extremism, theology, right, of counterterrorism, right? So, should we make fun of the terrorists in order to delegitimize them, right? Do you really think you're going to find those 72 virgins up there, I can definitely see how this can actually be very offensive to some, right? So once again, this is something to bear in mind. Let's wrap it up. We might have some we might have some security, right, or like more security, but at the expense of what? What is the price, right? Do we want a police state? What about data protection and privacy? What about the secularization and criminalization of groups? What about racial profiling? I'm pretty sure that you have all traveled after 9/11, and if you remember, it was tense. If you were a Muslim, you were probably frisked or screened much more often than non-Muslims. We have seen, as I mentioned, an increase in hate crimes, right, against Muslim women, mosques, right? Eventually, even confirming what the terrorists would say. I told you they are racist. I told you you are a second-class citizen. I told you they don't like you. Therefore, you're nothing. You have to join us. If you're interested, read the French sociology school, right? They have written extensively on this. Croft, Gilles Capel, Crochevard, on this, right? But the point being, we have, unfortunately, or we have done a number of things that might challenge even our own values. Once again, what is the big counter-argument to all of this? Well, if we are in a war, it's something inevitable. Even during World War II, certain civil liberties and even democratic values were kind of trumped on for the sake of security. It's something inevitable, right? Once again, I'm not championing this, right? So I'm just reporting what I've heard in my career, right? And the other thing, which is also very important to consider, it's something inevitable, also because, look, team, we study terrorism, but terrorists study us as well. In Bin Laden's headquarters, authorities found books analyzing Irgun, Che Guevara, all sorts of counterinsurgency, right? So they study us, right? And given that, they can infiltrate the democratic system to exploit either the legal seams, right, the gray zones, or to appeal to our democratic values in order to foster their agenda, right? So it's not that simple anyway. Given everything that we said, and I'm about to conclude, is counterterrorism an eternal dilemma? Well, if we borrow from Clausewitz, one of his famous trinities, right? So the army, the government, and the people. Here I have I've actually replaced the government with the law, with the legal system. Well, we can definitely see that we are destined to major dilemmas, and maybe we can argue even inefficiency, because we can be incredibly good here, right? But we can break the law. We can respect the law, but be bad here. Or maybe we can, be fairly good here, right? And trying to be as unite, as respectful and as lawful as possible, but then people can still attack us, right? So the way we see it is that counterterrorism has to balance between the military level, the legal level, and the societal level in order to achieve an effective strategy, which is, by the way, an interesting term, because I don't really think we have a strategy, but regardless, this is in theory what we have to do. So my question to you, and this is really the conclusion, do counterterrorism strategies, or for whatever they are, right, take into consideration such conceptual, legal, democratic, and ethical dilemmas, the ones that we've seen? If we go back to Fallon, to the special agent, he said that a number of counter-terrorist measures and tactics, including tortures, have proven to be ineffective and counterproductive, because now we have tens of thousands of fighters joining jihadist groups, and we are partly responsible for that. Today, we don't have time to discuss this. This will be the, as I'm going to be explaining very soon, the subject of a future webinar, but the point being, once again, it's not clear. And if it's not clear, where should counterterrorism improve the most? Why? How? The way I see this, obviously, I do not want to be fairly theoretical and philosophical, because we have to be extremely practical. But before we do that, in my opinion, we have to take a step back. And we have to strive for a much better and holistic understanding of both terrorism and counterterrorism. And in order to do that, we have to stay humble. And we have to be ready to adapt, learn, and bring as many people as possible. Because this is, by definition, in my opinion, counterterrorism is an interdisciplinary effort. We need everyone. Obviously, we have different roles, but we need religious leaders. We need sociologists. We need lawyers. We need people like me. We need academics. We need the military. We need social workers. We need NGOs. Everybody, we're in the same boat. I know it's difficult, but I studied in Israel, and the motto, the mantra was in my school: it takes a network to beat a network, and I really believe in this, even in spite of everything, right? So, team, I think I have blabbed for 51 minutes, and so just like Dr. Leone did yesterday, I am also going to offer another webinar, which is open to everyone in June. So in June, in a month, and this one is going to be about the eternal question: what is terrorism and what causes it, right? Then starting September 2020 till September 2021, we are going to be offering, so I'm also going to be offering other webinars open to ITSS-Verona Associates. And the first one is going to be the dark side of counterterrorism. So do you remember when we talked about intelligence failures, tortures, and all that? That's exactly what we're doing. So we're going to be focusing, so we're going to be delving deep on some big intelligence failures, torture, surveillance, and extrajudiciary killings. And then the second one, I will be interviewing former terrorists and extremists, trying to elucidate their journey from terrorism to counterterrorism. I really invite you to actually take part of this one, because this one is going to be amazing. And then, given that we will be 20 years after 9/11, the third one is going to be about like assessing the war on terror and its future scenarios. So in very brutal terms, what worked, what did not work, and then we're going to conclude with an eye on cyber terrorism, and then we'll be interviewing a couple of friends who actually do something like this. Thank you very much. I really, really, really appreciate. I hope I did not bore you too much, and I hope that you found this interesting or interesting enough. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michele. This was a lot of food for thought. For the sake of being organized, I'm going to ask everyone who is interested in making questions to put himself or herself forward if you want to, write your name in the chat so that I have a running order. Unless there is anybody with a very urgent question, I'm gonna ask one, but I just wanted to make sure I'm not overstepping anybody. Okay, thanks. Roberto Meme, would you like to open your microphone and tell Michele your question?
Okay, thank you very much, Michele. I'm sorry. I just would like to ask you, in your opinion, which of the European existing national strategies could be considered the more balanced in the way you've just brilliantly described? Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto, for your question. Look, I do not want to disappoint you, Roberto, but I have to be very honest with you. I have absolutely no clue, in the sense that the British system, in my opinion, at least has started to ask itself a number of these questions, right? Then in reality, I'm not really sure if they are trying to answer to actually answer this. But in Italy, for instance, like in our case, we're not asking these questions, or if we are, we're not really valuing them as much, in my opinion. The French system is definitely ahead in some terms, but in my opinion is behind in others, right? I think that in the northern part of Europe, countries like Denmark, for instance, right? They've been paying a lot of attention to the democratic dilemma, but at the same time, I'm really curious, what happened if they actually all of a sudden became France or Britain, right? So I'm not really sure. I think that just from an academic perspective, right? So not from a professional perspective, not from a legal perspective, right? So just from an academic perspective, I think that at least in Britain, they are asking good questions and they're working. So there's a lot of very interesting social work that is out there, that is trying, that is combined with the government and all that. It has a lot of flaws, but they're doing something. I hope that it wasn't too unsatisfactory, Roberto.
Thank you.
Thank you, Roberto. Thanks, Michele. I don't want to micromanage the question, the Q&A. It's just that, again, we got a lot of people joining us. I think there is about 36 of us, which is excellent. So thanks for putting your name forward here. Giovanni, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, guys. I have two questions. The first one is related to what Michele said before, that terrorism is fast, right? So the fact that terrorism is fast, fluid, and adaptable, while we have to deal with all this massive laws and rules, doesn't this make us lose from the start? And my second question is, haven't we, in the last decade, haven't we used a lot as we call it, the signal intelligence and technological intelligence? But my impression is that we are not relying much as before on human intelligence, which has proven to me to be extremely effective if properly used and coordinated. These are my two questions. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you, Joe, for your two questions. Well, obviously, Joe, I definitely think, like you, right? So unfortunately, we have been talking about this for a while. Democracies, generally speaking, it's like they are fighting with one arm behind their back, right? So when it was, especially in Israel, this was the thesis of Bosganor, Alex Schmidt, and everybody else, Reisner, of course, because we have big systems, and if we are trying to strictly abide by the law, we are losing already, right? However, I think that we're also losing if we're not respecting the law. So finding that balance between responsiveness and legality has to be, in my opinion, one of our primary objects. In doing so, I totally agree with you. We are increasingly relying on artificial intelligence and all that, which is amazing on one side, right? However, we don't have the means to decode all the amount of information that we're getting. Intelligence is something processed, right? And you know, we have to study a lot. We don't have the manpower. Even when I carried out in our country, the police were very, very, very honest with me. Just, Michele, we just don't have the men. I mean, to do something like that. And so all this technological advancement can help us. However, sometimes we don't analyze it properly anyway. So I mean, like, we're kind of losing that. In fact, Joe, read Fallon, because that's exactly what he says. You know, we are doing a lot of numbers, we are piling up a lot of materials, but we have to go back to the basics. Talk to terrorists, interrogate them, give them respect. Eventually, we're gonna get much more information out of them as opposed to all this data, or as opposed to torture.
Thank you both. So the next is Pietro Rizio. Pietro, go ahead. Pietro, just check whether you...
Okay, so
okay, yes.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
So, Michele, thank you very much for your illuminating presentation. Since 2015, we have seen the use of private military contractors against terrorism. So, I mean, the South Africans against Boko Haram in Nigeria, and the use of Wagner Group against ISIS in Syria. So I wanted to know your opinion about this matter, about the use of private military contractors in counterterrorism, but also the opinion of the other two participants you mentioned before. Yes. You said they are familiar with this topic, and so...
Yeah, absolutely. So listen, Pietro, thank you so much for your question. I'm going to share very briefly with you my opinion, but then I'm going to turn it over to, if he wants, if he's there, to Ahmed, who has researched this extensively from Bahrain. Okay, so pragmatically speaking, they can definitely be very useful, right? Because you pay them, they go in, they get the job done, and you know, no questions asked, right? So it's good, right? So it's good stuff. Obviously, I'm oversimplifying that because there are some regulations as well. It's not that they are criminals or mercenaries, like it's regulated. However, you know, it's important because they don't really, so they do counterterrorism, but they are not really following under, I don't know, like the United States or something like that. Sometimes you cannot control them. Sometimes they do bad things, right? And therefore, pros and cons. From a very quote cynical perspective, I can definitely see why we have used them in certain parts of the world. But Pietro, between us, I would not use them. You know, I think that you can control your army or armed forces in general in a much better way. In a way, yeah. But listen, Ahmed, if you're there, would you like to share your thoughts with Pietro?
Hello, good evening, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, using them is worse than not using them. I will point out a thing that happened with Black Waters in Iraq. I think it was the Fallujah fight,
yes.
to be exact. What happened is using Black Waters created a situation where the Allied forces or American forces became like a magnet for everyone to shoot at them, thinking that these are, you know, people who originally shot them a few days or a few weeks earlier, which in that case was Black Waters. So it created a chaos rather than helping the situation in that part or that scenario, to be exact. So yeah, in some parts they're bad. It's bad to use them, but if you have to use them, you will use them. Why? Because it's a quick way to do things, and no loose ends or no obligations. You just pay them, they go in, they do the job, they leave. However, you'll have to deal with the consequences later on, which are ugly.
Very good. Thank you very much, Ahmed.
Thank you. Just a brief comment to say that in almost 3 months, the South African almost defeated Boko Haram. Just to mention that.
Yeah. No. This is good. So see, but Pietro, but we're going back to the debate, right? Should we use them? Should we not use them? Context is very important, right? In Iraq, as Ahmed was saying, it was difficult. Maybe if the conditions permit it, I don't know. We can definitely.
I agree with you. They are not the whole solution, but just at the beginning. After it will be the responsibility of the states to solve the problem that brought to terrorism, the famous root causes. But just for the emergency, I think they could be a useful solution in some places, regulated and so on. Thank you.
Gustav, thank you both.
Thank you. Thank you also. Next on the list, we have Rebecca, Anna, and I think Francesca and Fabrizio Ciocca. So Rebecca, please go ahead.
Michele, sorry, it's Tom rather than Rebecca. I'm just logged in on my wife's account.
I knew it was you. Gustav.
I was just wondering what your views were. You mentioned earlier on that Hamas and Hezbollah have been seen as actors in international law and therefore have personality. What are your views? If their forces are struck by a NATO drone in the Middle East, does that give them the right to strike drone pilots, for example, on NATO soil? Is that a terrorist strike, or is that self-defense by a recognized actor?
That's actually a very, very, very good question. I can definitely see how they could actually evoke self-defense. But listen, if we have the opportunity, Alessandro Storchi, you're actually much more familiar probably with these topics than I do. Would you like to participate? Do you know anything about this?
Me? Would you reframe the question? I'm not sure. I'm not sure what you're referring to.
Tom, could you please then reframe the question better than I?
Yeah, of course. So all I'm asking is if certain actors that we regard as, or we in the West might regard as terrorist actors, but are recognised as having personality in international law, so are sufficiently powerful in their regions as to have the organs of government. If their actors are struck by NATO drones or by, it doesn't have to be NATO, I use that as an example, but if they are struck by a NATO drone in their geographical area, does that give them the right, under the principle of self-defense, to strike those pilots on NATO soil, for example?
I think this is an excellent question, right? And it's wow, this is actually very good. Please, Alessandro, go ahead.
Yes, I'm afraid that would be a question for some sort of international judicial panel that would step in if there's the chance. That's a very complicated question of international law. As far as I know, there's no settled principle or settled law on that, but I could be wrong. I'm not an expert of this specific field, also on state-to-state relationships. I bet something like that would end up, well, in front of the probably UN at some point, maybe of the Security Council itself, and then it could be even an ICJ question if if the legal personality you're talking about is a state-like legal personality that would grant them access to the ICJ, that could even become an ICJ adjudication or a permanent court of arbitration kind of adjudication.
Thank you, Alessandro. Listen, Tom, I think that obviously let's address the big elephant in the room. Is Hamas a state, like legally speaking? That is the thing, right? If we consider that as such, I'm pretty sure that they could make this type of argumentation, or Hezbollah, but I'm not very sure, legally speaking, like in international law, if they do have this legal status. But potentially, I think they might, actually. And so we have to be extremely careful, because then if we extend preventive self-defense, but all of a sudden, so let's just assume, right, that all of a sudden Hamas does become an actual state in legal terms, then they can probably say, whoa, wait a second, why'd you do that? So now we can involve self-defense, or at least like this is the feeling that I got. But as Alessandro was saying, I'm not sure if we do have an answer. But this is definitely a very interesting one, that you raised. So I thank you for that.
Thank you, Michele and Tom. Anna, it's your turn. Thanks for waiting.
Hi everyone. We're witnessing that the world is polarizing into two main views, globalism and populism. Globalists believe that we do not have another effective way to fight terrorists and terrorism than having an international organization to deal with it. So, don't you think that the national legal system and constitution can better deal with the ethical dilemmas regarding counterterrorism, considering that, for example, some, I don't know, for instance, United Nations Security Council hasn't been able to tackle the problem up to now in a proper way? Was I clear? Sorry, I'm a bit... was I clear?
I think I got it, but do let me know if I am misinterpreting your question.
Yes, thank you.
So listen, I think that obviously we live in a very difficult system, right? As you were saying, we're witnessing the emergence of two major blocks, right? Right? So globalism and the populism, but I think that within the system, the law has to step up and do its part even more, right? So that the discussion surrounding counterterrorism doesn't get so politicized, doesn't get so extreme. You don't agree with us, then you are a radical chic, or you're siding with the globalist one. Or conversely, you're a populist, you're ignorant, you're a gun nut, or something like that. No, I think there's always a middle ground. Things are complicated, and the law in this respect can help us. However, as Giovanni Giacalone was saying before, it's not always easy, because this takes time, and terrorism advances and all that. Look, so sometimes, Anna, let's be honest, we're not prepared. We're not prepared, even legally. And therefore, the only thing that we can do, from a political perspective, is, to, I don't know, create sites and all that. Because let us not forget, counterterrorism, just like many other things, is a topic, a very important topic in electoral campaigns. It grants you votes. And so I think that, in order to answer your question, yes, I would promote a much more, a culture of legality, right? Even myself, right, in my studies, I wish I did something a little bit more focused on international law, which we didn't really do, right? I think this is a mistake. For instance, right? Did I answer your question, hopefully?
Yeah, but there's a difference, in my opinion, between international cooperation and a globalization of this topic. It's very subtle difference, okay? But for instance, in my opinion, to keep the way we're dealing right now, it helps us to have different views and, in a certain sense, to protect and to deal more often with the ethical issues.
Oh yeah, definitely. So obviously, if we
international cooperation, yes, of course, is needed, but not maybe globalization of the issue, or as it seems to,
I definitely see what you're saying. Obviously, Anna, this is very open for debate, right? Because there are a lot of people who are saying, no, the more we are, the better. So if we globalize this, we have much better opportunities to actually overcome this. Other people are actually closing down and say, nope, we can only trust our intelligence community. Nope, we can only trust our academics. Nope, we can only trust our police or something like that, right? And in all of this, the law is kind of in the middle, right? So I don't know. I do not have the answer. I think that international cooperation is very important, but in a very transactional term, you have to pick your allies very carefully. And that's also very, very, very difficult.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, the list of questions is quite long. Sorry. Thank you, Anna. Francesca has a very important question, which might also be of interest to everyone in the chat. Francesca, are you still with us? Oh. Okay, I will. Okay, maybe I can read Francesca's question. Her question is, how can we become associate to ITSS-Verona?
Well, Francesca, I will let you know. And for everyone who's interested in this, Zen and I will be in touch very soon. Make sure that everybody knows. But thank you for this.
Okay, thank you. We got 10 more minutes. I mean, me and Michele, of course, we can stay longer, but let me just take the chance to say thank you to everyone before some people leave the chat. Fabrizio Ciocca, please go ahead.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Thank you, Michele. It was an amazing presentation. You put on the table a lot of issues, and now we don't have time. I would like just to ask you two more questions about the first slide that you said, the justification of an attack against terrorists, and you spoke about Afghanistan. And I would like to know your opinion about the Iraq war, because in that case we assume that they had nuclear weapons, but they didn't find. And second, if according to your opinion, we should consider terrorists always in the same way. For example, you are Italian like me, Giuseppe Mazzini, at that time, he was considered a terrorist by the Austrian government. For example, I wrote in the chat, when a group of rebels, they just use terrorist tools or methods to fight against a military regime, we should consider them terrorists as well or not? Thank you for the answer.
Thank you, Fabrizio. These are two amazing questions. Well, okay, so I'm going to give you what I think as for the Iraq war. Actually, I also lived in the United States. I studied in America, and I had a pretty fair amount of to the invasion of Iraq, or I know of some people who did, right? And you hear everything. Legally speaking, I'm pretty sure that the US government can make the case for a lawful intervention. We don't have time to discuss here, right? But even if you read Fallon, the special agent that I mentioned, he literally said this. So I'm quoting him. We tortured the guy. we were looking for weapons of mass destruction in Iraq, and we were looking for evidence that Al-Qaeda was there. We tortured the hell out of that guy. He told us what we wanted to hear, and then we went to the United Nations to say we have indisputable evidence, right? So even if I can still see some legality, absolutely, in the intervention in Iraq, because this doesn't really have to do with terrorism in general, but with intelligence and how intelligence can be fabricated and can be politicized, right? So this is actually a much broader topic on intelligence sharing and how intelligence is processed. My gut feeling, not because I liked Saddam Hussein, I think he was a jerk, right? Or in general, but I don't. So I can see why we went into Afghanistan, and I cannot justify that. Iraq, I'm not so sure. I can see one part of it, but especially considering everything that happened after Francesco, keep in mind that we started off. If you read Cronin, 2009, he talks about the strategy of counterterrorism. We started off because we wanted to prevent other 9/11s and we wanted to stop Al-Qaeda. Amazing in Afghanistan. We ended up doing all what we did. So we promote democracy, we topple governments. So then we got dragged into it, and so, you know, nation building, state building, and all that, right? So very complicated. As for your second question, which was about how do we categorize terrorism, not from a legal perspective, but from a very conceptual perspective, right? One man's terrorist is another man's freedom fighter, right? So that's the eternal dilemma, right? And obviously Mazzini, I moti rivoluzionari, right? So even Italian history is filled with people we revered as liberators, as patriots, but at the time were considered terrorists, right? The next webinar, which will be open to everyone, we will be talking exactly about this. But in a nutshell, I think it's incredibly disputed, but this is just my opinion. The threshold is civilians. If you attack civilians who are not engaged in anything, in order to terrorize them, to create a political response, that is terrorism. Boaz Ganor, my professor in Israel, is the man, I mean, for these things. He has been saying this for years. But he gets so much criticized because then the military would say, whoa, time out. Why are you placing all of our establishment in danger? Are you saying that you cannot do terrorism against a soldier? Right? So it's debated. But in my opinion, I mean, we have some military people in the room, so please do not get offended if I say something like this. But in my opinion, the threshold should be civilian, because if you attack a soldier, to me, that is an act of war. You know, regardless. So I hope I did answer your question, Fabrizio.
Thank you, Fabrizio Ciocca. Mani, are you still with us? Mani had a question on strategic culture of the non-state actors. How important is understanding the strategic culture of non-state actors? No, Michele, do you want to say?
Sure.
Ah,
go on.
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll go on. So, Nurs, please, what's your question?
Hi, I have a question from Michael. Hi, Michael.
Friend.
Right. My question is, like, you know, the culture of terrorism as well as counter-terrorism culture is completely different in every country.
Yes.
Right? And like a British security officer, British police officer, like I wasn't a police officer, you know that. We have only the dilemma. Problem is that this is why the British security services, they sometimes use a third country to interrogate people, like as the US did the same thing. But
yes.
when these news is disclosed in the media, then the officers and the security service were persecuted. This is why they went outside the court and deal the situation with the victims. Now, in this scenario, if the British police officer or counterterrorism officer, they catch extremist terrorists like Anjem Choudhury, so the question is, they have no other option except to use a soft approach, no hard approach. So if they use a soft approach, what type of method they can use to de-radicalize them or prevent them to committing a further terrorist incident in Britain or abroad? Because they don't believe in a democratic laws. They don't believe in a democratic countries. They have only their own Sharia made things.
Exactly. That's a great point, Noor.
Exactly. So police officers or the counterterrorism officer or the prevent coordinators, they have a different prevent study and a channel they introduce. But so far we see result is unsuccessful. So what do you think, what type of method they can use in the terms of soft approach that can eliminate the terrorism or at least extremism for further generations? Thank you very much, Mika.
Thank you very much, Noor. Everyone, Noor is actually like engaged in a day-to-day, I'm going to call it struggle in Britain to de-radicalize youngsters and people. So he knows a lot about this. I really encourage you to actually take a look at his work. But listen, Noor, I will give you my answer, and then if unfortunately he left. What a pity, because there was an Italian imam here that unfortunately had to left away, and I wanted to bring him in. But anyway, so I'm just gonna give you my answer. I think that we, as in the intelligence community, as the government, as law enforcement, should bring people like you in the whole equation more. Because eventually, at the very end of the day, if people like Anjem Choudhury, who everyone, if you don't know him, he's a badass. Like he's a very problematic character, right? Joe, I'm pretty sure that you know him, right? So he was incarcerated on charges of terrorism. He promotes violent Sharia. He promotes the Islamization of Britain openly in the streets. Right? And right? He literally says jihad is the most quoted thing in the Quran. It's a duty for all Muslims, right? So how do you approach a person like this? If I approach Anjem, I'm just another infidel, right? So I'm never gonna get to him. Never gonna get to him. You can get to him, like another person who knows. And I'm talking about you, but back in the days in Italy, when we were facing the red brigades, the red brigades, we can make the point, started going down when they started shooting their own people in the factories. Why? Because people from the left are going to say, whoa, you don't represent me. What the hell are you doing? We started off all together against the system, against the bourgeoisie. Okay, fine. But now you're killing innocent people, you're kidnapping people, you're torturing people, you're promoting the things that we don't want. We want to live in peace. And so, obviously many other things happen, right? But this was a major thing. And so I think that in this case, obviously, keep doing what you're doing. And I really hope that the Home Office, that channel, or what used to be Prevent, and all that all these de-radicalization programs bring people like you, or maybe even Hanif, right, and other people in, because you know what you're talking about. This is very important. Is that sometimes we have to feel big, right, or we need to, oh no, we're British or we're Italians and we hand this our own way, but we're on the same team. So maybe like as Anna was saying, we have to be, like, cooperation is important, right? Then, but once again, we have to choose. We have to pick the people who are going to cooperate with us very well. And so I think that this is a very important instrument in within this scenario. Hopefully, I answered your question.
Thank you, Noor. Thank you, Michele. Giovanni Giacalone, hello, Giovanni. Has had another question.
Yeah. Okay. Basically, when we say that we all need to fight terrorism, I mean, what do we exactly mean with that? What do we indicate with that? We. I mean, can we even talk about an international war on terrorism when we can't even share a common definition? I mean, think about it. If we look at the various blacklists of different countries involved, then I mean, Western countries or even Russia or North African countries, some groups are not shared by everyone as a terrorist organization. I mean, I think about Hezbollah, Hamas, Hizb ut-Tahrir, or even lately with the Jabhat al-Nusra issue. So I think that's also quite a relevant problem. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
Giovanni, this is a huge issue, and you know, it all goes back to what Boaz Ganor, whom I've been mentioning a lot. He is one of my academic pastors. You know, let's put it this way. That's what he's been saying for years. Until we don't have, or until we have a definition of terrorism. Apologies. Until we don't have a definition of terrorism, we cannot do anything properly, right? And I totally agree. However, Joe, it also goes back to what Fabrizio was saying. Not just in legal terms, but you know, you are a terrorist for me, but to other people, you are a freedom fighter. Once I was in Palestinian territories, and I was interviewing a person whom I did not know was an operative from Hamas, and he said to me, "Ha ha ha! You think I'm a terrorist, but in reality, I die, and I die for my country, and I will go to heaven." So yeah, I totally agree with you that we have to make some sense, but you know, we're always going to fight. So hopefully one day, you know, the UN is going to help us, or maybe even academia is going to help us and shed some light upon it. But listen, drawing on this point, what do other people think? Can we actually have a war on terrorism eventually, or are we just doomed to, you know, just wandering in the dark, actually? And so everybody does whatever they want. Does anybody have a thought? Like, does anybody would like, I mean, to share? Is it all just a problem with the definition, or actually even the political world should, you know, even change?
I think it's also a political problem, because I think that each country kind of follows its own interests, and you know, maybe even within the European Union, when we want to contrast terrorism, we might not all head in the same direction, because we have different interests in different areas where terrorism is involved.
Yeah, absolutely, Joe. So, I mean, the political side is huge, and if we apply a very realistic vision of international relations, well, yes, of course. So we are doomed to this situation, because countries are ruled by self-interest. So if a country is going to have an interest to say that someone is a terrorist, then that country might take action. If not, you know, we're going to stay still and we're going to keep fighting. So yeah, absolutely. If we look at the liberalist perspective, you know, it's all about international cooperation, then maybe we should actually try to convince, you know, like the major international organization, look, listen, terrorism destabilizes everyone, regardless, right? So, and therefore we all have to take action, because on paper, almost everybody agrees with this, but in reality, and Joe, you know this better than I do, we're all over the place. If we look at it from a very constructivist term, so all relations are based on what we construct, socially speaking, right? The values that we teach and how we securitize certain issues, well, then we need, as you were saying, a big elites at the top securitizing terrorism or just advancing the discourse on terrorism. However, I should add, without securitizing certain sectors of society. And that's, in my opinion, another major issue. Hopefully I answered your question.
Yes, thanks, Michele. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Joe.
At this point, I mean, we're running, we are beyond the time. I was wondering whether, are there any final questions? I know some people had to leave, as I can see from the chat, but they've asked Michele to share a list of references because they didn't have the time to write those titles down. I can see 2 questions coming in. Roberto, okay. Yes. If there is any question at this stage, please just open your mic and come forward.
Hi, this is Ahmed from Bahrain.
Ahmed, yes.
My question is about terrorism again. In a way, I think we all know what terrorism is. However, it's narrative driven, and hence that it's affected by our conscious or our unconscious bias. How can we overcome that as a whole? I mean, if you're talking about teamwork, if you're talking about multiple countries, multiple organizations fighting, countering terrorism, how can we overcome that?
Actually, Ahmed, if you're okay with that, before sharing what I think, I would like Noor to actually respond to you, because Noor does a lot of these things. Noor, would you like to, to share your impressions with Ahmed?
Yes, Michael. Well, I'm a researcher, a student, not expert like Michael. I just try my best. Ahmed, the thing is this: there are so many grievances mixed. In Iraq, people have a different grievances. Pakistan people have a different grievances. Britain and US people and the jihadists in Europe have a different grievances, different opinions, and different reasons behind it. So we cannot use a one solution, which is, for example, Saudi use a solution in a different way, then the British can use it. So what we need to do, we have to collaborate all together as a team. Then we have to use what tools and methods they have used in their country. So if you think for example, Anjem Chaudhry, the ideology is similar than the ideology in one of the top jihadists in Saudi Arabia, then we can use the same method that Saudi Arabia uses. Then we can use that. If the Hamas has a different approach of terrorism in Israel, right? Or people they are like we can say stabbing in London or car ramming. Now this ideology came from Israel. The Hamas, they were using car ramming and stabbing. So they came after 10 or 20 years in Europe. So for Europe is a new technique of terrorism. But in Israel, they have already countered that 10 years ago. So we have to approach Saudi security forces to get their methods, and we can apply in the Britain. Not in operational way to killing the people, but in a different way how they can arrest and they try to de-radicalize. So like I said, Michael, before, every terrorism and counter-terrorism culture in every country is different. So we have to announce Islamist terrorism, they are similar to everywhere, whether in Africa to the Europe or Asia to the Middle East. They have only one narrative, Sharia, Hakmiya, the ruling of Allah, ruling of God in the world. So we have to use method which is the same method we can use from the Quran. They manipulate the Quranic verses and ahadith and saying of the prophets. So we have to counter the same narratives from the same methods. So if we have to have a look at that, what is the culture of terrorism, then we have to use method according to that. Hopefully it helps.
Yes, thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Noor, and thank you, Ahmed.
Thank you. There is a question from Fabrizio Ciocca. Yes, Fabrizio, go ahead.
Okay, thank you. No, I would like to know by Michele, what do you think about the peace talk between United States and the Taliban? If is inside your framework when you talk about sometimes to find an agreement to avoid violence continuing. So what do you think about how was organized this talk, if there is a legal framework or not? Thank you again.
Again, I thank you, Fabrizio, for the question. So first thing first, we have a conceptual difficulty here, right? Is that should we negotiate with terrorists? Because some people say yes, absolutely, because they are part or they are active, obviously here, and therefore we have to negotiate with them at some point, right? Other people say absolutely not, because if we negotiate with them, the message is that you have to be violent first, and then we can negotiate. So people rationally could choose terrorism over political activism, right? So, but that said, within that framework, I think, so I'm gonna answer you with the response from one of my friends, actually, who actually fought in Afghanistan. I don't remember if with Al-Qaeda or the Taliban. So he was, quote, on the other side. And now he's doing a lot of counter radicalization work. So he rejected the violent means. But his narrative goes something like this. Eventually, the Taliban will win, right? And the US knows it. A phrase that I always like is that the Taliban would say to us, you have the clocks and all the technology, have the time. And it's true, because if you believe that if you die and you go to heaven, you don't care what's going to happen. Instead, every single day that we are there, we are losing lives, people home are getting fed up, and we're losing money that could be spent elsewhere, education, right? So what do I think? So within this framework, I think that it was inevitable, it was bound to happen, right? And look, I kind of see the good logic. As you know this better than I do, Fabrizio, even according to your research, rhetoric, narrative, the discourse is more important than the actual thing. If the Taliban can say, we won, they didn't win. But if they can say that, they're happy. If the US can save their face, like we say in Italian, if they can say, well, okay, so we're here, but we're not leaving, right? Because the CIA is still there, because we still train the people, and we reach some kind of an agreement, it's fine. It's time to really, really go home, even if it's not the case. The point being, so to answer the question, I think that it's good, but it's more about the narrative than is happening on the ground. Will the Taliban attack again? My reference in London, that former terrorist says they will. It's just a matter of time. They will. He even argues that Afghanistan is going to be much bigger than Iraq, that ISIS is going to regroup over there. Because this is the third time that we try to kind of get rid of something in Afghanistan and we don't succeed for whatever reason. Back in the days, I listened to this general, the US general, and he was saying that we needed probably 500,000 men in order to actually do well. Actually go there, search every cave, and lose half of them, right? It's just another way of fighting. And Afghanistan, for whatever reason, big mountains, incredibly bad weather, right? So it's good. It's good if you don't care, like about what's happening to you, and you don't mind staying cooped up in a cave for many months, right? So the question being, I think it's good. It's kind of good for the moment. It's all about the narrative and the rhetoric, but who knows? I'm very curious to see if that is going to become another huge ISIS linked haven. I hope not. My friend in East London is convinced of that. Convinced of that. He's saying that, you know, we lost, period.
Thank you, Michele, and thanks, Fabrizio.
I think that Noor raised his hand.
Yeah, sorry to interrupt. And question about Afghanistan, I just put a little bit light on it. Afghanistan, about Taliban. Taliban's in a US peace plan now. Like I agree with Michael, it's just a matter of time. Taliban, the first of thing, have a look at Taliban never be in a list of terrorism by the America, but Al-Qaeda was, right? Now, Taliban, the America always wanted to do agreement with Taliban. Now, in 2009, General in Afghanistan, head of the US Army, he met specifically President Obama, and Obama said, I want to get out these old mess up old army. So what do you think? What's the current situation? The Army General said, Mr. President, if you want to hear the truth, which we can't tell the people or can't tell the media, the thing is we are not going to win the war. We are not going to win the war. We will lose it. So better before we lose it, we have to leave it. How to agreement with them. Now, Obama couldn't do that. President Trump, he knew it, that there's no other chance except to do a deal and get out from there. Now, what will happen, they will get out from there, get out from the hell, because that's become a hell for them. Now, if they think the Taliban will be a peaceful, Taliban will never be a peaceful. When Taliban came in 1995, I was in Afghanistan. I spent 2 years in a jihadist training. I saw them, I talked to them, I know them personally, right? Where they come from, who supported them. Yes, I know them because I spent my time in jihadist training in Afghanistan, right? They are waiting for the US Army, they get out, pull up. They will start genocide of their own people, specifically the Northern Alliance and the government, Karzai ones, Abdullah ones, right? There will be a mass casualty. There will be the big war in Afghanistan is coming. And America knew it. America just want to get out from there. That their people, their citizen, or the army, when they're not going to be affected further, because the election is coming in September. So before the election, he want to get out from there. Show the public and American, we won it. Actually, there will be a big problem. And because now Taliban, so far, according to the agreement, Taliban, the fiction of Taliban now is an ally of the US, not anti-ally. So America, the US will try best to use the Taliban as the ally against Daesh, against ISIS Khorasan in Afghanistan, because they are going to be popular. If you look at the history of Abu Bakr Baghdadi, he spent his whole life in Afghanistan, not in Iraq. He nurtured in Afghanistan. Most of the bodyguards around, most of the trusted people, they were from Khorasan, from Afghanistan. This is why when he became a caliphate, first thing he announced, ISIS Khorasan, Islamic State of Khorasan, which cover Afghanistan, Pakistan, Iran, and these Balkan and near the Russian. This is what he wanted. His target was not Iraq and Syria. His target was Afghanistan, ISIS Khorasan, because Khorasan is a mention in a hadith, in a mention in the Islamic texts. Ghazwa Hind. So the problem is that the issue is that Taliban, according to the New Deal, they are American allies now. Till how long? We never know it, because we can't trust them. We never trust them. But they will use the America use them, they use America against each other, the national interest, which is Afghanistan. And let's see, but we don't trust them neither. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Noor.
Thank you, Noor. There was a final comment from Dr. Lisa McConnell. She placed it in the chat. Maybe she wanted to raise it. Lisa, just can you turn on your microphone?
Yes.
Yes. Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
Yeah.
Super. No, it's my understanding, and Nori, I appreciate your perspective. It's my understanding the lack of transfer of power to Osama bin Laden is what led to 9/11. Is that correct? Can you validate that?
Noor, do you want to answer, Noor? You for there? Noor? Maybe.
Well,
Oh.
well, everyone knows Osama bin Laden was a trained CIA agent in Afghan war in 80s, and everyone knew that he played his old role according to what US wanted. He was only become anti in 90s, right after Abdullah Azam was assassinated in Peshawar, Pakistan. Then he took over Al Qaeda, actually. But there's another game in story. But if we say that US wanted a power sharing with Osama bin Laden, I have absolutely no knowledge about that. Could be possible, could be not, because the US always use proxies for their national interests, specifically in the Middle East and South Asia. Probably yes, probably not, but I have absolutely no idea that they have. Yes, Osama bin Laden was their child. So might be they have a agreement with their own children at some point that didn't work, then he become terrorist. No idea.
Thanks, Noor.
Thank you.
All right. Unless is there any final intervention, I think we can call it a day. And unfortunately, we are beyond the time, so most people have left, but I also left a message in the chat. For those of you who are still here, I would like to thank you. Thank you very much for staying with us, for joining us once again today for a good couple of hours. And thanks. We hope to see you soon again for our next webinar in June. But let me tell you that before then, we will start a series of short but very interesting podcasts where we will be interviewing other experts across many disciplines on current affairs, of course. Michele, do you want to add anything else?
No, well, except for thank you so much, everyone. I hope I did not bore you way out of your mind. Thank you for sharing. Thank you for participating, and we will be in touch very soon, with everything like that. So have a great night, and once again, thank you for joining us.
Thanks a lot. And just wanted to remind you that we will share a YouTube link soon, and eventually Michele will share some of those references that he cited. See you soon.
Sure.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.